So I'm going to take a couple of minutes just to make a few plugs and do a number of thank yous, because we want to thank all the people that made this happen. Number one, all the people that are really making this happen is all the donors who are sponsoring and supporting this endeavor. The website that you go to has lots of donate buttons on it. And if you can find one and make a donation and bring us up to maybe $25,000, that would be good. Really, we would be super good and big support for the shul. I'm telling everyone that there's a threefold mitzvah to be done here. Number one, you get to learn Torah. That's a mitzvah. Can't beat it. Number two, because you are participating and viewing, you are enabling the rabbis. If there were no participants, no viewers, they're not going to give these classes. So you enabled them to teach. So you created and enabled the class. And number three, when you donate, you support all the Torah endeavors that Congregation Ariel is involved in all year long, including bringing you something like this. And this is something that we are giving to the community, and we hope the community responds in kind. And we have seen that it really has happened, that the community has responded in kind. So I want to thank Harold for a wonderful presentation. Before him, he was preceded by a great lineup of rabbis. Rabbi Yosef Shapiro was immediately before him, and Rabbi Horowitz, Moradina, the Rabbi Kashkarman, Rabbi Zellman, Rabbi Foxbrenner, Rabbi Meir Cohen, Day School. Even early this morning, Rabbi Dickstein started at 4 a.m. and someone was waiting for him. He had a student waiting for him. He had people on as of 4 a.m. And when I came in and I took over at 6 a.m., he already had 9 people. Now, another thing I want to point out, and that is that when you go onto the website, so you'll see, first of all, a wonderful graphic that was made by Rabbi Michael Friedman. And right in the middle of that graphic is a play button. So a number of you are watching through the live stream, which means that you can watch, but you can't participate. Below it, there's another button that says, click here to be an active participant. So all the people that are on the Zoom list, which right now number 26 people, so 26 people are on the Zoom list, they're the ones that can participate and interact. And I'm going to encourage you, if you did click on to be an active participant, be active. Be active, speak up. Your mic is muted, but when you want to speak, you can unmute and speak up and share. I'm sure rabbis would love to hear from you and love to interact with you. So please take advantage of that opportunity and do that. We want to thank the people at Raise Giving. You went to ariel.raisegiving.com. So the people at Raise Giving providing us with the website to make all of this happen and all of the mechanics that enable us to process the donations and everything like that. Want to thank a fellow named Josh Needle, who's at Broadband Services. I keep reading this off the piece of paper. Broad Spectrum Services LLC.com. And Josh Needle has helped us with all the technical expertise that we need, and that has been somewhat complicated. So I want to thank him a lot. I want to thank Debbie, who's running the office and doing this while she's doing 3 other things, as well as Basia Heinzelman, who's her assistant, making all this happen. So I want to thank all of them. I want to thank all of you. And right now, our next speaker is none other than Rabbi Freitag. Everybody should know Rabbi Freitag, and everybody should be familiar with his fantastic classes. So the first thing I'm going to do is make Rabbi Freitag a co-host. There you go. Now you're a co-host, and you can mute people or let people in or whatever. And Rabbi Freitag is, of course, a member of the Atlanta Scholars Kollel, one of the stars, and he gives outstanding classes all over the place. And Rabbi Freitag's class, what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to make Rabbi Freitag also. I'm going to pop him on. Oh, one last point. After Rabbi Freitag, we'll be joined by Rabbi Ilan Feldman in the 9 o'clock hour. And then Rabbi Yossi Vakrat is going to close out the evening. So without further ado, I'm going to put the spotlight on Rabbi Freitag, and as soon as you are large and in control of this screen, it's all yours.
All right, well, I suppose I should probably unmute myself. Can everybody hear me? Can y'all hear me? Just go like that. All right, well, you know, this this type of thing where you know, you go from one program and if one program ends and then there's like a short commercial break and then another program, it's like the olden days of like network programming. You know, it's like you just stick on this channel, just stay on this channel. You're watching Atlanta Torathon Live 2020. You know, this is really fantastic. Just stick around, just don't you know, don't change that dial. You know what I'm saying? So here we are. Let's keep moving and keep the Torah rolling. First of all, I want to say that the topic I'm talking about tonight is a little bit similar to something I spoke about in a previous time when we did like a holiday class at REL, but I came up with some new ones. And that topic is famous Jewish misconceptions, things that people think they know and are well known, but are not exactly accurate. I looked around for a whole list of them. I have a few new ones compared to my last time, and I do want to encourage participation. If you do have a question, feel free to, if you have a video, wave at me and get my attention, or chat at me. I will try to keep an eye on the chat as well. Worst comes to worst, if you can't get my attention, I'll mute yourself and say, hey, Rabbi. So let's begin. Let's talk a little bit about some famous misconceptions or ideas. Now, this is not so much a misconception because I'm just going to start with the idea of eating cheese on Shavuot or eating dairy on Shavuot, which is a very common, well-known custom, which I hope y'all are prepared for because you only got 48 hours to get ready. So maybe you got a cheesecake or you got some cheese blintzes. My mom used to make what she called Har Sinai cake, which was basically a triangle-shaped cheesecake, looked like a mountain. And that was the idea, looks like Mount Sinai. Now, why do we eat cheese on Shavuot? Now, the truth is, this is not so much a misconception as much as that there are a number of reasons. There are many reasons given. Some reasons, one of the famous reasons given is that the Jews got the Torah and then all their pots were in kosher. And what can you eat without cooking? Dairy. But it's interesting that there's a less well-known reason that's given in the Code of Jewish Law itself. Interestingly, if you look in the Code of Jewish Law, and there's a short little mention there about why we might eat dairy on Shavuot. And it's an interesting one, but it's a little more complex than the usual kind. So when folks ask, it's usually not the one the rabbis jump to, but I'll tell you what it is because I'm your friend. Why not? I'll share it with you. And that's this. There is there is a sacrifice. There is a service in the temple that is done on Shavuot. We don't have a temple anymore, and we kind of just, like all the other holidays, we recreate as best as possible. Either if there's a sacrifice, we pray, we say it in our prayers, or a Seder, we do a Seder, but we don't have the Carbon Pesach, the sacrificial, you know, Pesach sacrifice. But on Shavuot, there's a sacrifice called the Shtei HaLechem, which translates as the two breads. So the Code of Jewish Law says we need to do something to commemorate that particular sacrifice, that particular thing. So we should have at our meal two breads. Now you may say to me, Rabbi, don't we always have two breads? We always have two breads, every meal, right? What do you mean we should have two breads? I already had two breads. I got 2 loaves of bread. Yeah, but you only cut one. And so we want to do something else to indicate that we're trying to remember the Shtei HaLechem, the two breads. So one way to do that is to eat dairy and meat at the same meal. Wait, dairy and meat at the same meal? I didn't think you're allowed to do that. Hold on. See, if you tune out now, you're not going to know what's going on, right? You're not exactly. Aaron Altman is saying, you can't have dairy and meat at the same meal, certainly not in the same sandwich. So we all know that if you eat meat, you've got to wait a whole bunch of hours before you eat dairy. You certainly can't eat them in the same meal. But what if you have dairy first? If you have dairy first, can you have meat afterward? And the answer is, yeah, you kind of can. There's only a few types of dairy that if you eat them, you're going to have to wait before eating meat. And that's kind of like hard cheeses like Parmesan or something like that. But generally speaking, if you have dairy, you can go ahead and have meat. But You can't use the same bread. So for example, I got 2 loaves over here and I slice my first loaf, make a motzi, and I say, bring out the cream cheese, right? Or the cheesecake. And we have some dairy. And then I say, okay, let's go to part 2 of this meal where we're having the meat. I say, hold up. You don't have to wait before you eat your meat, but you can't use that loaf of bread. That's the bread you were using with the dairy. We got to switch to another loaf. And because you forced yourself to switch to another loaf, you're going to open up 2 loaves of bread. Hey, you know what that reminds me of? The sacrifice on Shavuot of the Shtei HaLechem. So the Code of Jewish Law gives a semi-complex reason why we eat dairy. Because what we're trying to do is structure one of our meals to eat dairy first, so that we're going to have to cut the second challah. And by cutting the second challah, which is something we never do, even though we do have 2 challahs usually, that will be another level and will indicate that we're trying to remember something unique, something we're missing now, which is the sacrifice of the 2 breads on Shavuot. So Aaron, I hope you're feeling better about what I said before about having dairy and meat in the same meal. This was the custom I had growing up. We made a motzi, went to the kitchen, had our dairy Har Sinai cake, and then we'd have to eat a little cracker or something to clear out our mouth, and off to have the meat. Right? It's a little complicated. You got to work it out. You got to know what you're doing, but it can be done. And that is the Code of Jewish Law's reason. Aaron Altman has a question, and go ahead and unmute yourself. Hold on, you're not unmuted yet. You're not unmuted. We gotta hear your voice. I can only ask to unmute. There you go. Wait. Maybe someone could help me unmute you.
Yeah, you can unmute him.
The button says ask to unmute. It doesn't say unmute. Wait, something just happened.
Unmute.
Okay, you're up. Aaron, your question is.
At my father's house, Aleva Shalom, we had to wait 2 hours no matter what. We ate cheese for breakfast or lunch at 10 o'clock. Breakfast, we had to wait 2 hours before we could eat lunch, no matter what. So maybe that's what my dad did.
Well, you might have trouble with doing what I just described then. I'm not aware of such a custom anywhere in Jewish law. Right, no, I'm just saying I happen to be not be aware of such a custom. I'm sorry?
Well, it was my dad's custom.
Yeah, no, so I'm not aware of a custom like that, but if it is your custom, then I guess you're going to have a challenge here. There is such an idea of waiting after certain types of dairy, specifically hard cheeses, but it's usually more than 2 hours. But I would be delighted to hear if you can call some of your relatives and find out what the source of that is. But so there you go. That's fascinating. All right, now on to the next famous misconception. Here we go. Let's go on to the next one. So this is an interesting one. Maybe not such a famous misconception, and that is, well, everyone knows that on Rosh Hashanah, on the second night of Rosh Hashanah, we have a custom to have a new fruit. Isn't that right? Y'all have a new fruit, right? And of course, for those of you who are my age or older, you remember when maybe even kiwi fruit was that fruit that no one has all year. And then when that became common, you got to go down to the store and get some dragon fruit or something. And who knows what you're going to get now? You always have to find some fruit out there that usually people don't have. And then you're going to have it just for that one night, and it's going to be special. But the question is why? Why are we eating a new fruit on Rosh Hashanah? Now, if you ask most Jews, they'll probably say, well, it's a new year. It's a new year. It's a new start. It's a new beginning. It's a new fruit. Right? Does that sound right to any of y'all? Maybe everyone knows the real answer, because that isn't the real answer. And the interesting thing is the custom is only to eat this new fruit on the second night of Rosh Hashanah, not the first night. Now, why? And the answer has to do with something a little complicated. And that is that we have a custom, we have a law, that when a holiday comes, we say a bracha, we say a blessing. Shehecheyanu. Every time a holiday comes, you make the Kiddush, and in the Kiddush you say Shehecheyanu v'kiyamanu. It's a blessing that says, thank God I've lived to see this day. You're just thankful. It's a happy time. I'm happy. I'm glad I saw this day. Now, the problem is that for those of us who live outside the land of Israel, for example, You have, for example, on Sukkot or Pesach, you have 2 days of holiday, or Shavuot coming up, right? See, the first night of Shavuot, you raise your glass and say, thank God Shavuot is finally here, right? Then the second night comes and you raise your glass and you say, thank God Shavuot is finally here. And someone says, it got here 24 hours ago. Where you been? Why are you saying that blessing again? And the simple answer is, well, we still do say that blessing again, because outside the land of Israel, we keep 2 days of holiday. Remember that? We keep 2 days. We keep 2 days because of an ancient problem with the calendar, that if you lived outside the land of Israel, you were never sure which day was the right day. So you kept the second day as a doubt, just in case it was the first day. So we always keep the second day in the exact same way we kept the first day, right? And just like on the first day, you said Shehechianu, basically, you're kind of restarting it from the beginning again, saying, Shechianu, thank God Shavuot is here. Wasn't it here the last 24 hours? Maybe it was, but we're starting again. And so that's fine. For all the holidays, the first day and the second day, we treat them equal. First day, here's the holiday. Second day comes, we say, maybe today's the right day. Let's say Shechianu again. Rosh Hashanah is the only one that gets a little tricky, because the Talmud says, maybe Rosh Hashanah was always meant to be 2 days. Maybe it was really meant to be a 48-hour holiday, not even a 24-hour holiday. It was meant to be 48 hours, right? And therefore, when I get up and say my Shechianu the first night, thank God Rosh Hashanah is here, yay! And then the second night, you're going to get up and raise your glass and say, thank God Rosh Hashanah is here. What are you talking about? It's already been 24 hours. What are you doing? And because we're not sure what to do about that Shechianu blessing, and it gets kind of complicated, we cover our bases. What we do is we get something else that we can say a Shechianu on. The first night, we don't need that. We know we can say Shechianu the first night because the holiday's here. But the second night, we're not sure how we're treating this. Is this just part of the first day, an extension of day one? So we want to say this blessing because we're not sure. So what we do is we get another excuse to say Shechianu. In fact, the code of Jewish law says it doesn't have to be a new fruit. It could be a new suit. New suit, new fruit. It rhymes. So what does that mean? One of the things that we say Shechianu on is a new fruit, right? There's many things you say Shechianu. One of them is if there's a fruit out there that you're excited that the season is back. The season is back. I finally get to eat one of these things. You say Shechianu. So you place that new fruit on the table for Kiddush, and that way you can say Shechianu anyway, whatever the case may be, whether it is a long holiday or not. So the reality is it's a little bit of a complex laws of blessings related issue, and it's not as romantic as, well, it's a new year, new fruit, but that is the real reason that we do it. So if between now and Rosh Hashanah, you have time to review this so you can explain it to all your friends who are sitting around the Rosh Hashanah table, who may be surprised to find that there's a rather interesting reason why we get a new fruit, right? I do want to say that this particular thing about saying Shechianu on a new fruit really is a little bit hard nowadays. What it used to be was that there were many fruits that weren't available for most of the year, right? Fruits were seasonal. And the only time you'd see this fruit is when that season came back, right? If you're in the Northern Hemisphere, maybe it's the summer, or maybe it's for apples, it's the fall. And that's the last time you see it till next year round. And so the next year the fruit comes back, you're like, yeah, apples are back. Yeah. Nowadays, apples are never gone. They're just always here. I mean, maybe nowadays you make a Shechianu on a roll of toilet paper. You know, they're back. The season is back. You know, I'm kidding. Don't do that without asking your rabbi, right? It's really supposed to be on fruit. So that is the interesting idea about new fruit. And I see that Eileen Miller has texted in the chat group the correct reason for the new fruit on Rosh Hashanah. All right, now let's talk about one or two other things. So I know that Hal Schroeder did cover this incidentally, but it may not be such a surprise to anyone. But I have encountered this in the past, that there are people who discuss, you know, sometimes what is the reason that God gave the laws of kosher? What is the reasoning behind kosher? You know, we have laws in our Torah that have different reasons. We have laws that we call mishpatim, which are financial laws, monetary laws like don't steal, or, you know, things that are reasonable, and moral laws and social laws that make a lot of sense. There are other laws that the Torah doesn't necessarily give a reason for, and kosher is kind of one of those where people think that the Torah gave a reason, but it kind of didn't. It just sort of said, I need you to be holy. So people very often have this mistaken belief. For example, they say the reason that you can't eat pig is because of trichinosis, right? It's dangerous. It's got some dangerous diseases, and God is trying to keep us safe. Now, what's strange about that is that the laws of kosher, particularly as they apply to land animals, are very simple. The only land animals that are kosher are animals that have a split hoof and chew their cud. No other animals are kosher. Pig is not the only unkosher animal. There are millions of unkosher animals, like rabbits and snakes and frogs and snails, and you can go on forever. So the concept of a pig and trichinosis, but there's millions of unkosher animals. It can't have anything to do with health or lack of health. And I'll tell you the truth, it's pretty easy to be unhealthy and keep kosher. It's a sad thing. I mean, listen, you make yourself a guacamole pizza with fries, that could be very kosher, but it ain't healthy, you know? So the reality is there is no basis to the idea that kosher has to do with health, certainly not in the Torah. And generally the approach to it is that we don't know the reason. God is, perhaps saying we should be a special holy people and designating us. There are theories, but health is not one of them. And certainly not trichinosis in pigs, which, I guess that was a common problem with pigs. But pigs isn't the only unkosher animal, so that whole theory is out the window. And once again, I see Aaron has a question. Do you have a question, Aaron? You don't have a question. All right, let's move on. Here's a good one. Maybe we'll take a moment and see what folks say. What is the reason why we use a challah cover on Shabbat at the Shabbat table? Okay, I'm gonna say, give it 30 seconds and see what people say in the chat. Some of y'all might have to lean forward toward your TV screens. This is interactovision. Anybody? Oh, okay, good. I see Eileen Miller wrote, so the wine is not embarrassed. Okay, so this is the typical thing that we say. The bread, okay, David Carson, the bread doesn't get jealous of the wine. Excellent, excellent. So this is the usual way we say it. So the bread doesn't get jealous of the wine. The question then becomes, why aren't we afraid when we eat dinner on Thursday that the chicken is going to get embarrassed of the peas? Or the peas will be embarrassed of the crackers, right? What's the deal with a bread being embarrassed by another? One food is embarrassed of another food, right? How can bread get jealous is another question. That's exactly what we're going to answer. So there are two reasons given why we cover the bread. One of them is colloquially described as so the bread doesn't become embarrassed, but that's really not what it is. The issue is like this. We have a rule that when it comes to blessings, when it comes to food blessings, if you have 3 items in front of you, there is a priority structure. There are things you make the blessing over first, right? Because they're considered more critical, central, and important in the hierarchy of foods, right? The highest of those is bread, because bread is the staple of life. It's just the staff of life. It's the central food of all existence. And so if you have bread in front of you and other things, in fact, bread is so central that if you make a blessing on bread, you pretty much don't make a blessing on almost anything else. There are exceptions, but it's so central. But otherwise, for example, if you have 3 things in front of you, you have crackers and you have cheese and you have a slice of apple. So usually, you have to make a bracha. You actually have an order in which you go. You make the mazonos on the cracker first because grains are so central to human life and human consumption that we make a blessing on the grain product first. And the apple is next because fruits of the tree are a special gift from God and they're central. And the last thing is the cheese. So there's a hierarchy of what blessings you make. So which is the one that comes first? The one that's supposed to come first is hamotzi, the bread. Now here's what's weird. I've got bread on my table and I've got wine. What are you doing making the blessing over the wine before you're making the blessing over the bread? That's out of order. You're supposed to make a blessing over the bread before you make it over the wine. If you look at the laws of priority and hierarchy and blessings, the bread always goes first. What are you doing? Right? Now, people usually describe that colloquially as the bread will become embarrassed. Right? It's not what it means. It means that you're not giving the bread the respect it deserves based on the laws of hierarchy of blessings. Again, bread doesn't feel any embarrassment. But if that's so why are we making a blessing over the wine first? Let's make a blessing over the bread, right? So it happens to be some people have that custom. It's kind of rare, mostly common among the German Jews. In fact, it's brought in the Code of Jewish Law, or at least that we wash first. I said that incorrectly, right? But why do we make the hagafen? Why do we do that out of order? And the answer is that you're supposed to make Kiddush before you eat. There's a law. You must make Kiddush before you eat. Okay, I must make Kiddush before I eat. And the primary thing you're supposed to make Kiddush on is wine. Okay, now I got a quandary. I really want to make the motzi on the challah first because that's the proper order. But then I can't eat the challah because I haven't made Kiddush. Okay, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll make Kiddush first and say hagafen on the wine, but that's out of order. So what we do is to remind ourselves of the fact that bread is generally preferable in terms of blessing, and this is an exception. We cover the bread, saying we're not ready for y'all yet. The way we describe that in shorthand is so the bread doesn't become embarrassed. Bread's not becoming embarrassed, right? This is simply saying we generally show higher respect to bread in the order of blessings, and now we can't. We have no choice. We've got to make Kiddush first. So cover the bread up to show that we haven't forgotten. We know we're supposed to make the blessing on bread first, but this is an exception. I've got to make Kiddush first and make the blessing over the Shabbat. There's a famous story, in fact, that supposedly a true story, that a fellow had a famous rabbi coming to his house Friday night, and they got to the house, and the fellow's about to make Kiddush, and he sees his wife didn't cover the bread. Right? He says, puts the Kiddush down. So what's going on here? I got this big rabbi, a prominent rabbi here, and I'm about to make Kiddush, and the bread isn't even covered. How could you do that? So she brings along the cover, and the rabbi pulls the fellow over. He says, let me ask you something. Why do we cover the bread? And the guy says, well, you shouldn't embarrass the bread. So the rabbi says, why? So does bread get embarrassed? I don't get it. Does bread get embarrassed? He says, so you know what the whole lesson of all this is? Don't embarrass people. And you just yelled at your wife in front of me. Like, you're more concerned about the bread becoming embarrassed than the wife? So somebody said, why not bring the bread to the table after Kiddush? We'll get to that in a second. Let's talk about the second thing, right? And then we'll sort of tie it back, right? And the second reason that we do is what's called Zecher Lemon. Zecher Lemon, which is in commemoration of the manna that fell. So, for example, you're probably aware the reason why we have 2 loaves of bread at every meal is because we always got a double portion of food in the desert in preparation of Shabbat, right? Because we weren't going to go out on Shabbat and collect our manna. So we got a double portion, so we have our 2 challahs there on the table. But the manna that showed up in the desert was presented well, packaged. What do we mean packaged? Had a layer of dew below it and a layer of dew above it. God didn't just give us the food, he put it in like a nice presentation. And as a recollection of that, we put our challah on a board, and then we put a cover over it to show that this represents the man with a cover above and a cover below. And I believe the reason why we bring the bread to the table first is because it's a respect for Shabbat, to have the table set with the essentials beforehand. And again, part of that is remembering the manna that came on Shabbos. Otherwise, you're right. Just bring the bread to the table afterward. All right, let us continue. Let's talk about, this one might blow your mind, or it might not. Who knows? So I don't want to ruin this for everyone, but the truth is the truth. What can we do? So we just recently had the holiday of Pesach. And at the Seder, we put out a cup of wine for Elijah, right? We put out a cup of wine for Elijah, Eliyahu Hanavi. And, in fact, when we put that cup, we go to the door and we open the door and we say a special prayer that God should avenge our enemies, and And so people often say that Elijah is coming to the Seder and, maybe watch that cup, watch him sip the wine. So I feel like I'm doing the equivalent here of parents telling their kids there is no Santa by telling you this. So please don't ruin it for others. I don't know. The truth is you got to teach Torah. So if anyone asks, there is no source to the fact that Elijah comes to the Seder. He does not come to the Seder. We call this the cup of Elijah for an entirely different reason. It has nothing to do with Elijah drinking from this cup. Here's what's going on. We drink 4 cups of wine at the Seder. And the reason we drink 4 cups of wine is that the rabbis instituted these 4 cups based on 4 unique words that God used in describing how he was going to take us out of Egypt. I'll take you out. I will bring you, I will save you. 4 different words. But there's a 5th word. There's a 5th word, and maybe we should be drinking a 5th cup. And that word is vehevesi, meaning I will bring you into the land. And there's a discussion in the Talmud whether we should drink that 5th cup as a sign of the completion of our being taken out of Egypt, is that not only does he save us from the Egyptians and punish those Egyptians and take us out of Egypt, and we're back. Thank you for tuning back in. Here we go. So we were talking about, does Elijah visit your Seder table? And the answer is no. In fact, during our downtime here, while I was waiting for us to get back, I found an article that synopsizes what I'm about to tell you, and I'm going to post it in the chat. All right, but anyway, don't read it yet. I'm about to tell you, right? So Elijah does not visit the Seder. What happens is that there are 5 words that we look to that are describing the redemption, and they are the words that inspire us to drink 4 cups of wine. But there's a 5th word, and that word is vehevesi. I will bring them to the land. And there's a debate halachically whether we ought to be drinking a 5th cup of wine to cover that 5th word, vehevesi. And as a compromise, essentially what we do, according to most Jewish customs, is what we do is we pour the cup, but we don't drink it. We pour the cup, but we don't drink it. And why do we refer to it as the cup of Elijah? Either because perhaps it represents the final time of the Messiah, that we reserve that 5th word for when everything is completed, all of our exiles are done, and Elijah will, be the harbinger of that day. Or because the answer, that I believe this is according to the Vilna Gaon, he says, because whenever we have an unresolved dispute and that we're not sure what to do with, we're waiting for the day that Elijah will come prior to the Messiah and tell us what the rule is. But none of the reasons given have Elijah coming to your Seder, right? We describe it as the cup of Elijah for more than one reason, but none of them are that Elijah showed up. Now, if you do want to meet Elijah, you got to go to a bris. That's where you get to meet Elijah. That's where he's actually showing up. And that's where we got the special chair for him. That's where he's visiting. But as far as the Seder, unfortunately, he's not visiting. So I hope I didn't ruin this for you, like take away your, like I said, it's almost like telling kids that there's no Santa. But for Jews, we still get to meet Elijah. Just make sure you get to a bris, then you'll get to meet him. All right, so if the cup of wine doesn't go down in your house, now you know why, because Elijah didn't actually come. All right, I feel very terrible having shared that with you. All right, now 1 or 2 more. We don't have a ton of time left. Rabbi, I just wonder if you could let me know in the chat if I go till 10:02 or if I go till 9 o'clock. Just let me know in the chat how far I go. All right, now we were talking about the idea, someone mentioned the Eitz Hadas, the tree of knowledge in the garden. And most people, it's very common to refer to it as the apple in the garden, the apple tree. And people have little coloring sheets and there's an apple. Nobody ever said it was an apple. It does say the fruit of a tree. The name of the tree is the Eitz Hadas Tov Hara, the tree of knowledge, tree of knowledge of good and evil. The Talmud discusses, is it grapes? Maybe it's wheat. You know, who knows? There's all sorts of possibilities, but apple isn't one of them. So unfortunately, of all the ideas we have about what that fruit is, apple it isn't. And so for better or worse, I mean, look, it's not terrible to draw it as an apple if you don't know what it is. I mean, more accurately, at least grapes was accepted one of the views in the Talmud. So, but then I think that would confuse people if you did the Eitz Hadas Tovara, you know, there's the tree and it looks like a grapevine. But, you know, if you're curious, you can look into the Talmud and see the various opinions as to what fruit it was. So that's an interesting misconception as well. So I'm just going to ask again if Rabbi or someone in charge could just let me know how long I'm going and let me know when I'm finishing if you just want to put that on the chat. And yeah, I will.
On the chat.
I'm sorry?
It'd be on your chat.
I don't see it.
It's
okay.
Not. Okay, so even if it's not on your chat, it's 8:55.
55. Okay, good. We have a few more minutes. I just want to cover one or two other things that I covered in a previous class that I gave at Ariel because there are some interesting things that not everybody knows. When the internet was in its infancy, one of the first things that was going on were Ask the Rabbi panels, and I joined up as one of the rabbis for the Orthodox department. And one of the most common questions I got, there were two very common questions, one of which I don't think any of you have a misconception. I don't know why it's out there, but many, many people wrote to me and said, can a Jew play football because the football is a pigskin? And I always wrote back, as long as you don't eat the football. So that was the simple answer to that one, and I'm guessing that nobody here had a question with that. But the other common question, of course, was, can you be buried in a Jewish cemetery if you have a tattoo? This is probably the most famous Jewish misconception, and the answer is having a tattoo has no effect on being buried in a Jewish cemetery at all. Zilch, none, right? So the question only becomes, where does the idea come from? And it either could be because bubbies like to, threaten their kids and say, don't you know, if you get that tattoo, they won't bury you in a Jewish cemetery. And it's a good threat, but it's not halachically true. But the other reason may be, and here's a theory. The theory is like this. We generally have a custom that we only bury Jews in a Jewish cemetery, right? Now, if we know you're Jewish, even if you have a tattoo, you get buried in a Jewish cemetery. But maybe what the bubby is saying, if one day you're traveling on business and you drop dead somewhere and they find your body, they bring you to Cheva Kadisha, they'll say, oh, this can't be a Jew, he's got a tattoo. That doesn't mean if they know you're a Jew, they can't bury you in a Jewish cemetery. These are just my own theories, and I'm glad to let you do a PhD on it, write a whole theory as to where this came from, but it ain't true. There's no such idea that you can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery if you have a tattoo. It's a mystery where it came from. One or two more things, because I have a few more minutes. Another interesting and probably important thing to know about in misconceptions is the idea of koshering things in a flower pot, right? Now, some people told me, my relative, they had a flower pot and they stuck some knives or spoons in the flower pot. And why did they do that? To kosher it. You say, you sure it's not because someone had silver seeds that they were growing some utensils, right? You come there and they have a flower pot and they got utensils growing out of it, right? What is that and what's going on? The first thing you need to know is that there is no such way to kosher something by leaving it stuck into a flower pot. Just embedding something in a flower pot does not kosher anything. Otherwise, we rabbis would have, every shul would have a very large flower pot in the foyer for everyone to bring all their kosher things to dunk into, right? There's no such thing. But let me explain where the misconception comes from. There are times when you mess up in the kitchen where you haven't messed up too bad. Meaning when you call the rabbi, you say, Rabbi, I've got a meat knife and I have a big brick of cold butter and I was spreading some, well, I don't want to tell you, I don't want to say you cut the butter, you took the butter, you put a little butter and you started spreading it on your bread. You say, oh no, this is a meat knife and I got butter all over it, right? So the rabbi will say, was anything hot? Was anything spicy? I mean, you didn't get the flavor into the knife. But then you say to the rabbi, so how do I get it off? How does butter come off of a knife? And back in the time of the Shulchan Aruch, when they wanted to help you figure out how do you get things off of something where you don't actually have to get the flavor out of the thing, you just need to get it off of the surface. Now you would say, I know how to get things off of the surface. It's called a sponge and it's called a bottle of dish detergent. But back then that didn't exist. And it's not only that, but maybe it's not as effective as the ancient method, which was using an abrasive. What abrasive? What abrasive did you have 1,000 years ago? Well, you took your knife, you went into the back garden, and you stabbed the ground 10 times. And by stabbing the ground 10 times, you abraded off the butter off your meat knife, right? And in fact, the Code of Jewish Law says it can't be ground that's too hard, it can't be too soft, right? You got to be able to get it in the ground. It also can't be too soft that it doesn't give a nice abrasion. So all that was a way of scraping something off of your utensil. Sticking it in the ground and leaving it there does nothing. Sticking it in a flower pot doesn't do anything, right? Of course, when you do that and when you go to your back garden, you take your knife and you start clearing off your knife, the next door neighbors are saying, the Jews are at it again. They're trying to kill Mother Earth, right? So try not to do it when others are watching. Try not to stab your garden when the others are watching. But really, it's just a matter of using abrasion to get some fatty substance off of your utensils. And it does come up in kosher. In fact, there's a discussion nowadays whether it's effective to use soap and water in place of that. And some rabbis say it's not effective enough. They really want you to use an abrasive to really almost like sand it off, right? You have to be careful it doesn't get too hot. Don't take it to a sanding wheel, but an abrasive. So there's no magical thing about leaving things in your flower pot. So please don't leave things in your flower pot to kosher them. Just always call your rabbi if you have a kosher question, and he will guide you and will tell you what to do. And if he tells you to go stab the garden, now you know what it means, right? Okay. So that's about it. I believe we're out of time. There's many other famous misconceptions, whether you need 2 brachas in your shalach manas, that people don't know how to slaughter a giraffe, and that's why we don't eat them, that you're allowed to hint anything to a non-Jew, and they can do whatever you want on Shabbat. There's all sorts of misconceptions that you, for example, only need a mezuzah on your front door, not other rooms. There's plenty of stuff. But as they say ulamad, go out there and learn, and you'll know lots of stuff, and you got a whole holiday coming up to learn. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi Freitag. I'm going to cancel your spotlight, although you had the spotlight and I really appreciate it. I must say that Rabbi Freitag taking Eliyahu Hanavi away from the Seder is an unforgivable sin. And I don't know how we're ever going to live this down, that this was the program that brought that into the world. So, I mean, we're going to have to deal with this. I don't know. But anyway, really entertaining and very enjoyable. Rabbi Freitag's a great class. Before Rabbi Freitag leaves, I want you to know that your class was sponsored tonight. And first of all, the Anonymous is sponsored. I think that they're brothers, or maybe they're cousins, or maybe they're not even related to each other. But Anonymous and Anonymous both were 2 of the sponsors, as well as Kevin and Sheila Cranman, and Leandro and Bella Greengarten, Sophia and Mati Miller, Stephen Bonnie Elenoff, Eileen and Jonathan Miller, Miriam and David Ziskin, Natalie and Joel Sokol, Adrian Litt, and Jonathan and Heather Kamenir. So they were all your hosts. They were all the sponsors of Rabbi Freitag's class tonight. And we're really very grateful to all of them, as we are to all of our sponsors who are sponsoring and who are running up our tally. And, we're pumping it up there. We're about $24,000 or so. We really greatly appreciate everything that everyone has been doing tonight. We especially appreciate all of our presenters, all of the rabbis. If it wasn't for the rabbis and rebbitzins, by the way, we had my wife, Maradina, was on this afternoon, and we have Mrs. Rivka Froxbrenner will be on tomorrow afternoon at 3 p.m. So all the rabbis and the wives and all of our lay teachers, everyone who's on, it's you that made this whole thing happen, because people wouldn't be coming if it wasn't for you. So we're really happy that you're doing this. And I want to say that the most encouraging thing, I wasn't sure if this was a good idea or not when we first came up with it. And I sent out an email to a long list of rabbis, all the people I know, rabbis and teachers throughout Atlanta. And the response was so fast and so overwhelmingly positive that it really convinced me that we were onto something great. So I want to thank you all. Thank Rabbi Freitag. Thank all the other rabbis who presented today.